This is the one, people. This is a topic I have been dreaming of talking about with somebody who was qualified to talk about it. I've been dreaming about this for so long. And luckily, the universe sent me Tanner Cookson. Tanner is a SaaS sales guy, tons of experience in the SaaS world. And now he's selling with a vendor into the managed services space. And so we compared and contrasted what a SaaS salesperson and an MSP salesperson should look like, could look like, and answered that classic question. Should your MSP hire a salesperson who's coming from a SaaS role? What are the pros? What are the cons? Are they going to be a good fit? Tanner and I discussed this very topic at length. Let's get into it.
Great. Awesome. Well, I'm Tanner Cookson. I'm the Director of Sales here at Alternative Payments.
Yes, you are, Tanner. I'm so glad that we were able to get this scheduled after meeting at a conference earlier in the year. Listen, you're an interesting one because if I remember right, you have not sold in an MSP. Do I have that right?
You are correct. Yeah, I have not sold in an MSP, but I've had my fair share of selling into MSPs, which is quite interesting.
For sure. Just for the listeners, give us a little bit of a snapshot of your sales history. How did you come into sales? When did you come into sales? What's been the sort of the wave tops of that career that's led you to the director role you're in now?
Yeah, great question. So I started off, I think sales really is part of my DNA. My parents own a small business. And so my dinner table conversation for as long as I can ever remember was always about, sales and being involved in the business. And, I started at a very young age. They actually sold apparel, sports apparel for universities and colleges all across the States, all across Canada. And so I did a ton of work for them. I eventually, decided at one point, after college that I was like, hey, I really want to do my own thing, try to make it on my own, see what can come out of that. And so I landed a sales job for Niagara Falls Tourism and the convention center. And that was pretty unique. I was actually selling convention center space to businesses to host their events. So I did a whole bunch of, work there for a couple of years, really decided there was something, I think it was around the 2018, 2019 mark where I really decided hey, there's something happening on the tech side. I don't exactly know what it is. I've never been a part of it, but it's compelling me and I really want to get there. So I moved over after hundreds of interviews and getting declined from 99% of them, moved over to the tech side, starting as an SDR, really worked my way up within the organization, eventually led the global sales development division, grew that team from about 5 people to just under 25, had a ton of success there, and then got introduced to our CEO at Alternative Payments and decided, now is time to take the leap and, start at a new up and coming software service within the MSP space and throw myself into the fire of the world of MSPs.
It's amazing, man. I could hear that story you just said 100 different times from 100 different people, and all 100 times I'm like, I love that story. Somebody's sales in your blood, started selling event space, which is not an easy sale. I mean, so I sold catering was my first job,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And yeah, kind of an unconventional, one of those things where you have to be creative to figure out how to get people to care about your product. It's not a sexy thing that people are, I want to go hang out at a banquet hall, right? You've got to figure out a way to make it worth their while. And there's also a lot of options for people who are looking for those things. But then moved over to tech. What was it about tech? Was it just the allure of the high 6-figure earnings that you heard about? Or was it just the millennial in you that wanted to be in something that's more cutting edge? What was it?
Yeah, I think probably more so the second part. It's the millennial of me thinking hey, there's got to be, something faster paced and faster moving than selling event space, for example. Is pretty interesting. I was also just always have been, but really ambitious, and like really have thought like, hey, like I need to kind of align myself with an organization that's like just constantly evolving, constantly kind of pushing the edge, and always just trying to learn. And I thought that was a space that's kind of up and coming, and that's super vague, right? Like software is just very vague, and I don't think I really had an idea of like what it really meant kind of coming into this space and like what it would really entail. But I knew I wanted to put myself in a position where I would be really challenged at the end of the day, and I had to kind of think on my feet and adapt and learn and kind of fight to succeed. And that's really what I wanted.
First of all, we have to go back. You just said the word vague. I pronounce it vague. Do you say vague? where are you from, Tanner, and why do you say vague?
I'm from just outside of Toronto, so I grew up in Canada. I have a whole bunch of words that are going to come out on this podcast that you guys are going to be like, what the hell is this? But
okay, yeah. I listen. I'm not teasing you for being Canadian, but we had to go back. Okay, so super vague. It was super vague. You're from Toronto. Then you were in the Canada side of Niagara Falls.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, the good side, right? The one where you can actually see the full waterfall. So
yeah, right.
We had a lot more to sell than the other side.
We're the downwind mildewy side of it down in the States. Listen, I didn't mean to derail you, but I'm curious, like having always been enterprising and having that in your blood, have you ever started your own thing? Is there any part of you that wants to be pure entrepreneur rather than selling another product that you didn't invent?
Yeah, I mean, I actually had a really good mentor at my last job. And one of the things that really resonated with me, because I've thought about that a lot, right? Of like, hey, there's got to be opportunity to kind of start and run my own thing. And the way he framed this was like really quite elegant, and it's going to sound way better. I'll never be able to replicate what he said. But basically what he was saying is that there's opportunity to be an entrepreneur and an entrepreneur was basically how he framed it, right? An entrepreneur is like, sure, you can go out, you can do something on your own, you can take that risk, and that's really outstanding for a lot of people. And maybe that's something that, I'll do down the road as well. But there's also this like theory of entrepreneurship, right? And it's like, how can you be the CEO of your own career within other organizations? And I think there's something about that struck me as really compelling. And to me, I think there's so much opportunity within all of these different companies that exist out there, if you can find the right ones, to have an extremely, extremely successful career based on that motion of like, hey, I am that entrepreneur of my own career, and I'm just doing it in a different environment. My environment is inside of another company versus on my own, completely on an island, right? Yeah. And so I think I've been able to find like a lot of purpose and value with the companies that I've worked for, taking that kind of stance and approach to it.
It's really amazing, and I imagine has been a big piece of the success you found in your career, in that you're taking ownership over your destiny while also this is kind of a perfect alley-oop to like, really my mission is like, I have a core belief that sales is an inherently noble profession because you are a performance-based employee who's building another person's business, right? Now, it doesn't mean there's not plenty to be gained on your side, but I really like that perspective that you're like, look, this is the thing I can control. This is my career and I am in charge of it. And how well I do or how poorly I do and how serious I take it is going to have an impact, just like it would if I were a business owner. But we worship entrepreneurialism like way to a fault. Sometimes people sometimes become entrepreneurs because they're too dumb to have a job. And we worship and praise them as if they've done something well. But the truth is that they shouldn't own a business, or they really have no business owning a business. But you clearly know how to sell stuff. Your trajectory in your career has proven that alone. But I think it's admirable and super cool to hear that perspective. So thanks for sharing that with me.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's a lot to to get into on that aspect of it, but you're right. Like there's something extremely noble about taking full ownership and accountability of your career within different organizations. And I find a lot of the best salespeople that I've seen have all taken that approach, and they've all seen themselves as accountable as an entrepreneur really would be at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. It's just a good segue too, because we talked when we met the other day and we were talking about this and realized, man, this is an exciting conversation that should be on a hot mic, because you're working in SaaS. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't work in SaaS. I've never really worked in SaaS. I've consulted in SaaS, but I've never been an SDR selling a SaaS product into the B2B space. But this question comes up a lot because there's so many people, there's so many SaaS products, and there's so many SaaS salespeople, and there's so many transient ones because of all the layoffs and all that stuff, right? So we've got all these people who are quote unquote trained salespeople. They might have even been heavy quota carrying salespeople who might have even been performing. And I want to talk about this. Like, what happens when you pull a SaaS person out of a SaaS company? So unpack a little bit for me. What does it really mean, even knowing how vague SaaS really is? But we can use your company for an example. Like, you sell a software, you sell a product. Describe a little bit high level of what the motion of selling SaaS looks like. Let's say, like, from an outbound perspective, like describe the sales cycle life of somebody who's trying to go out and find B2B SaaS customers.
Yeah. So I think to kind of break it down, there's a lot of swim lanes and a lot of process built into a particular SaaS motion, right? So if you take our company, for example, we have BDRs that are directly responsible for booking cold outbound demos, right? Or setting appointments, right? So their kind of main avenues, obviously, are like phone calls, email, LinkedIn. That is like their motion. That is what they're accountable for at the end of the day. And that's what drives like a lot of velocity behind our sales process. Once that appointment is set, we really have our account executive team, right? And our account executive team, they're really responsible for seeing that opportunity from the moment that demo happens all the way through to when that contract is signed. Now, what I think is really interesting about a SaaS model in particular is that you just have more people doing kind of more of like a small defined scope of the entire job. So after that sale has been made, then you now have an onboarding specialist or a customer success manager who's responsible for getting those accounts up and running and activated and happy and making sure everything is working appropriately, et cetera. They can respond to support tickets. And then you'll have somebody later coming in on the account management side, right? And that's really focused on that growth and that upsell and cross-sell for new future products that eventually get built out. And so it's a pretty interesting model when you think about it. And sometimes in different business models, it can just be completely inefficient and a total waste of money. And how do you find, one person that may be able to tackle 2 or 3 of those roles, or maybe it is efficient for you to have those roles. But that's a little bit of like that process of going from that initial cold call. You really are touching a lot of hands throughout that full process.
Right. And then you've got a management team sort of on top of that, oftentimes a player coach, right? Where you have a sales manager who might be carrying a team quota or a personal quota, whose job is to source some opportunities. Sometimes even managers have to source their own opportunities, right?
Totally.
And oftentimes what we're seeing in the sales ecosystem is that account executives are also expected to self-source a certain percentage. A lot of times companies are setting a quota above what they know the SDR quota is going to be in such a way where they know the account executive is going to have to go find some business in order to really make the big bucks in their role as well. Like, rather than just sitting there at the end of a conveyor belt, backing money into their pockets, which is how a lot of SDRs might think that's the AE's role, is to just sit there and do the easy job, right? But this like assembly line sales that you're describing makes sense in SaaS because the product is the product. Like, it doesn't change Your use cases you might have different use cases, but you're not customizing your agreements, you're not customizing engagements, you're not rewriting terms and conditions, stuff like that, right? But also it's justified because of the velocity. Because you guys are doing a higher number of units, and you don't have to get into anything specific with like alternative payments, but I mean, a lot of times account executives are doing 5, 10, 20 deals a month, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's just more of a velocity game. I mean, the underlying business numbers are also a little bit different. Again, it's a totally different model when you're talking about actually having like overhead and like technical staff servicing and being available and working hours, right? Versus then just the initial lift of building the product itself.
Right.
So there's quite a different, like, kind of fundamental business model there that just requires a different sales motion.
And that is the crux of it right there. Because this is what I want to unpack a little bit more for an MSP listening. Because at the end of this, I think I'm going to ask you a yes or no question. I'm going to do my best to get an answer out of you other than it depends. I'm going to ask you about, should an MSP hire a SaaS salesperson? But we all know that there's a lot of that's a hard question to answer. But for example, what you're describing right now, the model of SaaS is such that basically you build a product, you spend a whole bunch of somebody else's money building a product, hoping you've got market fit. And then getting a new customer is pretty much just a double click, right? Like your margin is such that you can have an acquisition cost that's considerably more aggressive than the acquisition cost of a service-based business, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you can invest more human power, you can invest more process, more tools in the SaaS model. And one of the pros of that is you end up with really well-trained and really well-managed employees who are part of a thriving ecosystem that is well-resourced. The difference being that if you bring over somebody from enterprise SaaS sales or something, who's a middle manager or a director even in the SaaS space, they're used to having a certain amount of budget that they can just dump into the sales motion. Now you come over to managed services where the acquisition cost needs to be considerably lower. The velocity is way lower. The average MSP I talk to gets like 4 to 5 new clients a year, right? And before they work with somebody like me, our goal is to get them to 8 to 12 clients per year pre-referral, getting to an average of 10, let's call it 10 to 18 new clients a year. That MSP is cooking with gas, unless they're at the like $10 million number. So if you're doing a deal a month, right, and your acquisition cost also has to be lower and your velocity is lower, you can't have 3 layers of consultants and 40 layers of tools, and you can't have 2 layers of management. So talk to me a little bit about sort of the culture shock you could imagine from a salesperson coming from that hyper resourced sales environment into something a little bit more Rambo, a little bit more hard scrabble on the MSP space. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I actually think it's less of like a software distinction and more of a company size distinction, right? And to give you a good example of this, up until like 8 months ago, what our team did was everything. We didn't have actually those defined swim lanes laid out yet. Myself, the other 2, 3 reps that we had on the team, we're all responsible for everything at all times, right? So all pipeline generation, all closing, all contracting. We did some of the onboarding work, not all of it. It's a little bit of a different model there. But in general, I find it's actually more related to company size, right? And employees and people like myself that are used to different sizes of companies, you have this different perspective on like what resources you should or shouldn't have access to. And I think the person that comes from that startup environment is actually much more of a Swiss Army knife, whether they come from SaaS or whether they don't come from SaaS. But that person coming from that upper tier scale up SaaS business that's had a bunch of funding and is growing at a really high clip and has got more than 200 employees, for example, that process is very, very defined. And those resources are very, very expansive. And so a person in that is going to have that completely different environment, that completely different perspective than somebody that maybe worked at Alternative 8 months ago, for example.
So is it fair Is it fair to say, as fair or unfair as any generalization like this is it fair to say that an MSP might have more success hiring somebody who's worked at a startup versus, hey, I worked at Salesforce, I carried a $1.5 million quota and I hit quota, I was President's Club every year. Is she going to have the same versatility, the same value to an MSP who's who's looking to do 12 to 18 net new logos a year versus somebody who maybe was more of the Swiss Army startup space? Like, any thoughts there?
I would say from like a general standpoint, yes, 100%. I mean, even me on this team, like I wouldn't personally hire somebody that came from Salesforce, for example, right? And why is that? It's because you're going from a completely different situation, right? It's
Yeah.
like moving from New York City to like somewhere in like Omaha, Nebraska, right? Like it's just like
Yeah.
it's two different worlds, right? And it's really hard to adapt to those two different lifestyles in a really quick amount of time. Now, I'm not saying it's not impossible. I'm sure there's people out there that do it. But generally, my philosophy, and it's the same thing with who you sell to, right? At the end of the day, if you're selling to more like minded people that kind of look and feel like you do, and there's similar company size, it's generally more relatable. And the same thing is true, I think, on the employment side, right? Like if you can find somebody that comes from a similar, no matter what they sell, they come from a similar environment in terms of size of employees, resources available, et cetera, generally there's going to be a much more likelihood of success in those environments.
Yeah. I really like that, man. I like that perspective, especially you've hired a lot of salespeople in your life, right? Do you do interviews and stuff too?
Yeah. All of it. Yeah.
And so if you're looking for a BDR, that's a very common role. MSPs are trying to hire. Very often we see the BDR and the AE role combined in managed services. So somebody is what we might call a full cycle sales rep, right? They need to go find business and close business. What are you looking for in a candidate? And then the follow up to that is, if you're an MSP owner, what do you think they should be looking for in a candidate if they need somebody who can source business and close business?
Yeah, to me, there's like a couple of core characteristics that are critical within any sales hire. I mean, to me, the first two things that are always top of mind is drive, right? Like, how driven is this person to want to show up and have and set really, really high expectations for themselves, right? I think, like you mentioned this earlier, and there's just like no ways around it. Sales is a hardworking job, right? And it requires a lot of effort. And it requires a lot of effort with smaller success ratios, right?
Yeah.
Like if you can set appointments at a 1% to 3% booking rate, you could be doing great depending on that model.
Oh,
If
yeah.
you're doing above that, you could be doing absolutely phenomenal or at best in the world. And that's a hard environment to be in. So you need somebody that is especially driven and very much ambitious in terms of where they want to go. I think where a lot of on the hiring side, what we get distracted by is often experience, right? And experience often takes precedent over curiosity, and it shouldn't, right? I think curiosity is the next most important thing. And it's really about what are the questions like they ask you, right? At the end of the day, you need people that are genuinely interested in what you're doing, who your competitors are, who your customers are. Why do they use you when they could use anybody else in the world? What is it
Yeah.
about your company, about your culture, about your team that's a better place for them to work than anywhere else? Right. And I
Yeah.
think that element of curiosity is fundamentally important. And I don't think there's necessarily experience that teaches that. I do think that's one of those things that, people have and don't have. And it's up to us as hiring folks to figure out, do they have that or don't they?
And I
There's
would
more
even
stuff
add
we
that,
can get into, but I think like those are the most important.
yeah, don't mean to interrupt you, but I would even add that oftentimes experience or success in a role can kill curiosity in a rep.
Yeah.
Like, they can be like, well, now I have a formula for success. And so, like, I really don't want to deviate from my formula. I don't really want to learn anything new because I know how to make $250,000 a year. So I'm just going to keep doing this, you know? But oftentimes what we have found, I mean, I love what you're talking about. This is so valuable. What we found is younger reps, but I don't even really mean younger. I mean earlier career salespeople oftentimes are getting into sales not just to make more money, but of course you want salespeople. You want salespeople who want to make money.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big indicator of drive. If
Mm-hmm.
they're quite content with where they are already, then they're not going to have that healthy competitive energy that's going to make them keep calling after getting, a 99% rejection rate. They've got to have that drive. But I love the curiosity in them. One of the things I look for in salespeople when I'm interviewing is if they don't ask me like 5 to 10 questions minimum, that's a very bad sign. They should ask me as many questions as I asked them in an interview. That's my take, right? I want them to go, so why are you hiring? What happened to the last person in this role? Talk to me about how you guys came up to quota. How many people are hitting quota? There's a quote in this dumb old show called Silicon Valley where this guy says, the best salespeople in the world don't sell difficult products. The best salespeople in the world sell the easiest products to sell.
Yeah.
And frankly, it's because they can choose to sell whatever they want. So if your company culture, product, process is making it harder to move your product, you're not going to attract good talent.
Yeah.
Right.
So sometimes what I do in the interview process is just kind of, nagged a little side thought in me, but I'll like literally ask, a few questions to get started, and I'll turn it over to them after like 5-10 minutes and let them and see how long can they ask me questions for? Like, how long is this interview going to go? Are they going to ask like 2 questions and then the interview is over in 13 minutes? Well, it's up to them. But it's, 100%. Like the more questions and curious that person is, the more confident that you should be in them.
Yeah, 100%. I love it, man. To circle back to something we were talking about, because you're making a distinction, and you are making a distinction that's fighting against my bias. Brian's got a little chip on his shoulder bias sometimes against SaaS sales, being that oftentimes I'll see people who, these guys come in and they feel like they're God's gift to sales because they make $300,000 a year. But really, they're running a play that a company has invested millions of dollars into perfecting, right? Like literally millions. They've hired the best consultants in the world to split test and stress test every word on their battle card. And all they really have to do is show up and run the play in many ways. We are finding that that's less and less the case because basically like marketing dollars are being spread thinner as marketing efficacy goes down because of saturation. And because reps are being expected to source more and more of their own business. That's why we see reps building their own personal brands and things like that. So I don't mean to say, like, obviously I know sales is a hard job. And if you're succeeding, you're good at what you do. But when we have a SaaS person who says, yeah, I'm the best, all I do is lean on, I call Jerry from legal and I get Sandra from marketing and then I get Billy from branding. And then they don't realize, most companies don't have a legal and a branding and a marketing. You're all those things. You have to perform all of those functions while making your 80 calls a day, while hitting all of your closes. And do you see that is there like a work ethic red flag that we should be looking for from somebody who's used to having a whole lot of extra resources?
Yes, I really think that it's the mindset and philosophy around the outbound motion, right? And like to your point, I also wouldn't hire that enterprise AE making $300,000 a year that has all of these resources at their fingertips in order to be successful. One, that just doesn't align with the culture that we're trying to build. We want people to be successful, but we're growing from the bottom up and we need to learn together and kind of knock through walls as a team in order to do that. And there's no like fast track to that answer. It's all going to come through kind of learning, curiosity, and work ethic. For the point of like red flags, I do think a lot of it is based on, and I've had a lot of interviews and talked to a lot of people on that. It's a lot of philosophy around outbound, right? People in SaaS, what happens a lot is that people kind of grind through the SDR, BDR days. They get that promotion, and now they feel like they've completed that part of their career.
Ah.
And that's like the worst thing imaginable, in my opinion, because you're
Mm,
losing everything that got you to the point where you're at today. And the moment
mm,
you get rid of it, you're never going to get back to as good as you were. And that's often a red flag in any business, right? Like, you get really good at what you do. It also relates earlier to your point of like the experience standpoint of like, sometimes the worst person you can hire is that person that's super experienced and has done it all before, because they're not going to want to start from ground zero,
yeah.
right? They're not going to want to come in and try to do it all, right? And think outside the box and try new ideas. And they're not going to know how to act when they ask for something and nothing is there because there's no resources. So I think it is like, that's, one of the biggest red flags is like, what is that person's perspective on outbound, right? If there's any type of hesitation on putting in those efforts, to me, that's the wrong person to hire for my business. Like, there's nobody I would hire that I felt hesitation on
Yeah.
the outbound side.
Yeah. I really love that. When you ask the question, how do you feel about outbound? They go, yeah, I've done it.
Yeah.
But I thought this was an account executive role.
Yeah.
Then you're going, okay, got it. You feel there's a chip on your shoulder. And humility, this is something we should talk about too, that like
Yeah.
humility, it kind of can go hand in hand with curiosity, that when a salesperson says, I've achieved a certain level of success where now I have earned the right to not have to work as hard as I used to, that person is, they're at the beginning of the end of their value to an organization. Like, you can structure a comp plan, which we could nerd out on a way that nobody would ever want to listen to, but on building comp plans, because I like the idea of building a comp plan in such a way where an account executive doesn't make the real money unless they go and source their own opportunities as gravy on top, right? Like, hey, we'll pay your bills with what we hand you, but if you want to hit your 2x, 3x multipliers, you got to go find business. But then every deal you go and find, you get paid 2 or 3 times more because of just the way that the quota and multiplier works. But when you become too arrogant to keep getting coached, too arrogant to go get embarrassed on cold calls, you have a shelf life as a salesperson if you have that attitude, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. 1,000%. 1,000%. And I do think like, I mean, I have a limited sample size, like based on my career, but there is something that most SaaS companies are doing right when it comes to that humbleness. Now, I think companies lose that quite quickly as they continue to grow, and you get those reps that start making that 300, 400, $500,000 a year, and they start to lose a little bit of that
Mm-hmm.
humbleness and gain a lot of that ego and start to lose all of the work ethic. But in general, from what I've seen from smaller companies that are really growing up across the entire team, there's generally a good culture of like just learning and challenging and being empathetic, and at the end of the day, like, the salesperson does need the environment around them to be
Mm-hmm.
successful. And it's hard for individuals on their own to be able to keep those ideologies as core to them if that's not replicated in other parts of the business as well.
Mm. It's so valuable. I have two more questions I want to ask you, and then I know I need to let you go. First is, I'm trying to think of how to make this an easy question for you. It's kind of a hard one, because one of the disadvantages that MSPs have over something like SaaS is the compensation opportunities are simply not as great. You can earn more in SaaS on average than you could earn selling managed services. So you might be able to, it's very hard to get to 200,000 selling MSP. It's very hard. You've got to do high volume. You've got to be great at what you do. And it's not going to happen for the first few years. Do you have any advice for somebody who's also, there's a lot of competition in your hiring world, but for somebody who's hiring for a salesperson, any ways of making the role more compelling and attractive to a sales rep besides the on-target earnings?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. And one, I do think that's changing, right? Like I think the SaaS world went through this unrealistic bubble for the last few years, and that bubble has burst. And all of these SaaS businesses are trying to get much, much, much more efficient. They burned cash at an unbelievable rate. And I don't think we're going to get back to this stage where you have a 20 something making X $100,000 per year without all of that experience, right? You're still going to see some of it, but I don't think it's going to be as crazy as what we saw. And so I do think there's going to be a lot more level playing fields, certainly now and certainly down the road. But beside compensation in OTE, I really think like, I always think of like, I think of myself in my own career, right? And why did I choose the organizations that I worked with? And why did I not choose different organizations? And a lot of it to me is because of, the team that was there, right? Did I feel like this team offered an environment where I had a tremendous learning opportunity? And was there a path of personal and professional development? Right. I think at the end of the day, all of us as humans, really what we're looking to do, like nobody wants to, go into a job and do that same job for the next 40 years. Like a lot of our culture around careers has changed quite fundamentally over the last few decades. And I think what people are looking for now, certainly what I'm looking for, is like, how do you put yourself in a position to continue to grow?
Yeah.
And companies can offer that in a lot of different ways, and not all of it. Certainly some of it is tied around compensation, but I think more of it is actually tied around like, how are we investing in these people? How are we investing in their careers? Are we giving them opportunity to learn? Are there different things that we can offer from a different avenue? Maybe it's stipends for professional development. Maybe it's just helping them kind of see like what their path could look like beyond sales. There are different parts of the organization that we could help grow them into. Are there leadership avenues? Is there anything else, right? There's a lot that we have within our control that doesn't have to boil down to OTE. Now it's important, right? Like I'm not taking it out of the equation, but there's more that we can add than just that. And I think if we get too transactional, too focused around the dollar comparison between companies, we're going to lose out on all the stuff that actually moves the needle.
Yeah, I love it. Getting paid. People want to get paid to grow. They want to get paid to learn. And if you can offer them those things, it's really compelling. I love it. The final question I have for you is if we've got a salesperson in an MSP listening, and they're probably solo. There might be two of them on a team, but it's a single person, one person army reporting directly to a CEO, and they got to go and find all this business. Any words of advice, words of encouragement to somebody who's listening, who wishes they had that sales culture around them, but they're the only cultural contributor?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an excellent place to be, right? Rather than like having the culture be defined for you, you are that core source, right? So like start creating it today on what you want that to look like, and work hard and continue to knock down doors. And I think like being at a stage like that is one of the most fun opportunities that you can have in your career, because you're directly tied with the CEO, you're directly tied with that owner, and you get to help create what that future business is going to look like. So take that as an advantage, not as a disadvantage, and leverage that for all it's worth.
I love it, Tanner. Thank you so much for that, man. Just in case anybody doesn't know what you do and where they find you, tell us a little bit about alternative payments and what you guys are doing for the channel.
Yeah. So I'm with Alternative Payments. So we work directly with MSPs. We offer a really competitive payment solution. So we basically automate the entire accounts receivable process. So we integrate into PSA, accounting software, et cetera. just to be able to make that collections process easier. But, the channel is relatively new to me. I've been with alternative payments for under 2 years, and this is by far like the coolest industry I've ever worked in. As expansive as it is, it's so tight knit, and the relationships here are extraordinary. Like, people really work together to lift everybody up together. And I've never seen an industry that operates on like such a tight knit peer group that really shares all of the secrets of the trade, always trying to help each other, always trying to be, an advocate. You just don't get that in other industries. And I think that's something that I'm super proud to be a part of. And I know our entire company is super proud to be a part of. And, it's something we're very, very interested in investing in as well. In any way we can help this channel grow.
Yeah. Well, you're doing it already. And I just wish you continued success in doing it. Thanks again for being on the MSP Sales Podcast. For all of our listeners, you can get a hold of Tanner. I'll put some contact information for him in the show notes if you've got more questions for him. But again, thank you, my friend, for being here, and we'll see you at the next thing.
Amazing. Thanks, Brian.